Hey! Before we start, all 4 stories today were sent in by real people. Each one sat in my inbox for weeks, and I went back and forth on whether I should even read them out loud. I can't verify any of them. But I can tell you this, when you read dozens of these messages in a row, certain details start repeating across people who never knew each other. And that's a little more unsettling than the stories themselves. If you're new here, every week this channel brings stories that keep you on edge until the very last second. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now, turn off the lights. Story 1, A Letter from a Girl in a Rented House. This story was sent in by a real people who asked us not to use her real name. Let's call her Sophie. Sophie moved into an old house on the edge of town, renting the ground floor with its own entrance to the backyard. The first few weeks were unremarkable, old pipes creaking, upstairs neighbors pacing at night, the usual noise of an old house. One evening she decided to clean the fish tank, and as always left the backyard light on. It's a motion sensor light. An hour into the cleaning, the yard light flicked on and off. Then again. And again. At first she assumed it was the neighbor's cat, which often wandered the yard at night. But when she looked out the window, there was no one there. Just an empty yard, the porch light slowly dimming on its own. She decided to ignore it and went to bed. Around 3 in the morning, she was woken by a sound, like someone shifting their weight heavily from foot to foot, right under the bedroom window, on the flower bed no one ever walks on, because there's a deep pit there from the old foundation. In the morning, she found footprints on the flower bed under the window. Bare feet, large, leading from the fence straight to her window, and stopping there, as if whoever left them had simply stood and watched for hours. There were no footprints leading back to the fence. None at all. Sophie told the landlord about it, and he replied, very calmly, that the previous tenant had moved out just as suddenly, after a few nights just like that one, and never got back in touch. Just don't leave that yard light on anymore, was all the landlord advised, and he didn't explain further. Sophie still lives there. She says she now keeps the bedroom curtains closed before. If you're already feeling a little uneasy, this is a good time to remind you, you're not always alone in your messages either. The next story is exactly about that. Story 2, A Message from Moam, who didn't write it. This story was sent in by a young man who asked to be called simply Dan. Dan's mother passed away 2 years ago. He never deleted her number from his phone, the chat stayed open, her last message a simple, "Good night, son," sent the day before she died. One evening, working late, Dan heard a familiar notification sound. He glanced at the screen out of habit, and a new message had appeared in the chat with his mother. "Are you still up?" Dan froze. Same number, same profile photo, same name. He checked, he'd returned his mother's SIM card to the carrier long ago, and the number should have been reassigned to someone else a year back. He typed a reply with shaking hands, "Who is this?" The answer came within seconds, "Did you really forget me that fast?" Dan showed the chat to 2 friends. One said the number had probably just been reassigned to a stranger who somehow knew the family's old history. The other went quiet for a long moment, then asked whether Dan had recently visited his mother's old social media page. Dan said he hadn't, not in months. The second friend then said quietly that an hour before that message, someone from his mother's old account had liked a 2-year-old post on her page. Dan blocked the number that same night. He says he still checks the chat sometimes, just to make sure nothing new ever shows up there again. The next story is the shortest of all. Story 3, Knocking on the 9th floor window. This story was sent in by a woman named Helen, who lives on the 9th floor of an apartment building. One evening, around midnight, she heard knocking on the kitchen window. Not the door, the window. On the 9th floor, with no balcony below it and no ledge anyone could possibly climb. She walked over and saw no one. Just dark glass, her own kitchen reflected back at her. She figured a branch had blown against it in the wind and went back to what she was doing. 5 minutes later, the knocking came again. This time, 3 clear knocks, evenly spaced, as if someone were rapping their knuckles deliberately, on purpose, to get her attention. Helen turned the kitchen lights up all the way and walked right up to the window. On the glass, on the outside, she saw a handprint, a wet mark slowly drying right before her eyes, as if someone had just pressed a hand there and pulled it away. 9th floor. No scaffolding, no window cleaners, no one working on the building that evening. She checked with the concierge the next day. Helen says she never leaves the kitchen curtains open at night anymore. And sometimes, when she forgets to close them, she hears those same 3 knocks, always right at 11. If you're home alone right now, go ahead, pause the video and check your windows. I'll wait. Let's continue. Story 4, the dashcam recording from a night shift driver. This story is a bit different from the others, because it involves a recording that could, in theory, be checked. Although no outside person has actually seen it. This one was sent in by a rideshare driver named Ray, who's worked night shifts for 7 years. One night, around 4 in the morning, a passenger got in on an empty street. A middle-aged man, silent, gave an address on the outskirts, and stared out the window the entire ride. Ray says nothing about the ride itself stood out, except that the passenger never once blinked, the whole time Ray glanced at him in the rearview mirror. At the destination, the man got out without paying or saying a word, and disappeared into a building. Ray figured he'd let one bad fare go, it happens sometimes, and drove on. That evening, reviewing the dashcam footage for a report, he paused on one frame. In the back seat, where the passenger had been sitting, there's a moment where the seat is simply empty, seatbelt unbuckled, no one there. Yet a second before and a second after, on that very same footage, the passenger is sitting there clearly and unmistakably. Ray showed the footage to 2 coworkers. One said it was just a sensor glitch from the low light at night. The other went quiet for a long moment, then asked Ray to repeat the exact address where he dropped the man off. Ray gave the address. His coworker went pale and said that a year ago, a house at that address had burned down with its only resident inside, and the lot has been empty ever since. Ray checked the maps himself. There's nothing at that address now but empty ground. He still drives night shifts. But he says he never picks up fares on that street after 4 in the morning anymore. That's it for today. For stories from real people, and not one of them has an explanation that would satisfy everybody. If one of them got to you, tell me in the comments which one, and why. I read every comment, and honestly, that's where I get half the stories for future videos. If you've got a similar story of your own, real or not, it doesn't really matter, send it in the comments or a DM. Maybe next time, it'll be your story you hear here, from me. Subscribe, hit the bell, and, before you fall asleep tonight, check one more time that your door is locked. See you next time.